All right, by my clock, it's 12:01, and that means it's time for us to get started. I'm Eli Sagor with the University of Minnesota, based here at the Cloquet Forestry Center. I run the Sustainable Forest Education Cooperative, and I'm really glad to be here. We are kicking off I guess this brings us to the end of mid-year, the end of the first half of our 2017 webinar series. We're very glad today to have Jodie Provost with us. These webinars are offered by SFEC in partnership with the University of Minnesota Extension. And today is the first of two consecutive webinars addressing wildlife habitat and forest management in a couple of different ways. Today we're going to hear from Jodie, who's going to be talking really about, as we're planning timber sales and other forest management activities, what can we do? You know, what are the wildlife habitat needs? You know, what are wildlife habitat and what are wildlife species looking for in habitat? What are their needs, and how can we think about those things as we're planning our forest management activities? Next month, we'll hear from Mark Nelson. Mark is with the FIA program, Forest Inventory and Analysis with the Forest Service. He's going to give us sort of a state of Minnesota's forests talk, so a high-level talk about data, FIA data. What do we know about forest types, trends and changes and current composition of Minnesota's forests in ways that are relevant to wildlife habitat. So again, we're really happy to kick this series off today with Jodie. Jodie is a private lands wildlife specialist with the Minnesota DNR. She's going to start up in just a moment. The only other thing I want to mention before she starts is that we're going to do Q&A just a little bit differently this time. Those of you online, folks here in the room, you can just raise your hands. Broadcast site hosts, you'll want to use the Q&A feature, not the chat pod. We've had some trouble, I think, with questions getting to the right place with the chat pod. So if you're online, you should see the Q&A option down near the bottom of the screen. Please submit your questions through Q&A, and you won't see your question after you submit it, but I will. And either I will reply using text or we'll alert Jodie and she will reply. So again, please use the Q&A feature to submit questions. That's all I've got. Jodie, I'm going to hand the floor to you. Jodie Provost.
Okay, thank you, Eli. Yes, today we're going to be visiting about timber harvesting and wildlife habitat. And the goal of our visit today is really to help encourage landowners like yourself to harvest for habitat, to learn how to use timber harvest as a tool to improve our forest for our wildlife. And why do we want to do this? Well, you, our family forest owners, own 40% of Minnesota's forest. That's roughly 6.8 million acres, or roughly 194,000 landowners. Wildlife habitat and the recreation associated with it are very important motivators for we landowners. Many forest wildlife benefit from active forest management. Private timber harvests have greatly decreased since about 2007, despite so many family forests. And really, great forest management equals great forest habitat management. Today's forest management decisions really influence tomorrow's habitat and the wildlife that we'll find in them. Our responsible stewardship of the soil, our habitats and forests, and these lands that we're entrusted with can really significantly, positively impact the wildlife habitat, the clean air, the clean water, our soil conservation, landscape aesthetics, our recreation, the cultural and historical and education benefits, and very importantly, our forest products. Our forest industry and economy benefit when we harvest in our forest, and we need them as a tool to manage our forest. So it's really a collaborative effort between us. We need each other. Now, wildlife population numbers are affected by, the addition and loss of animals, the addition occurring when there's recruitment or reproduction or they immigrate to an area, and the loss when there's mortalities or deaths or when they emigrate and leave an area. Wildlife populations are always naturally fluctuating up and down. Very rarely are they ever steady. And the addition or loss of animals are affected by nutrition, weather, predators, buffer prey species, disease and parasites, accidents, the hunting and trapping regulations, but primarily by the quantity and quality of habitat. And this is a key factor that we can influence. We can't influence the weather, but we can provide really good habitat so they can get that nutrition, have cover to hide from predators, better withstand diseases and parasites. Now, natural disturbances are what created and maintained the habitats, the forests that we have today. They evolved under disturbances such as flooding, windstorms, insects, droughts, diseases, browsers, and wildfires. And when we're doing our habitat management today, what we're really doing is trying to mimic these natural disturbances, whether it's through harvest, mowing, shearing, chipping, baling, burning it, or even through grazing. These are all disturbances where we're trying to mimic the disturbances that these habitats evolved with. And the wildlife use and benefits that we get from harvest really depend on a series of questions I like to ask myself or encourage landowners to ask themselves. What wildlife species are present in your landscape, and therefore could you potentially benefit? Which of those species habitat needs are met or not met on your land or the potential harvest site and in your neighborhood? And these depend upon the site itself, the size of the harvest site, or how much land you own, the age of the forest, the composition and mix of the species, the structure that's left after the harvest. It's just as important what you leave as what you take when you harvest, and as well as the features in the surrounding landscape. It's important to consider what's on your neighbor's land, and we'll touch on all these aspects today. Some species will benefit from harvest and some will not. And generally, the more intensive the harvest, the fewer forest species that will benefit. The harvest design and implementation of it is very important. Its design depends upon your objectives, what wildlife and habitats you want to benefit, but also if you want to, what products you might want to get out of your forest, how much funding you might be able to generate from your forest, a combination of these, if there's certain species you want to focus on, or if you're thinking more short-term or long-term. And of course, we always encourage you to think long-term. Now, when you're thinking about what species to benefit, sometimes it helps to think like that critter. And as I said earlier, to really think about the whole neighborhood. This slide shows, for example, a golden wing warbler. When they're returning from their wintering grounds in Southern and Central America, at first they're honing in on the forest region of the Northeast United States. And then they start thinking regionally to Northeast Minnesota, perhaps, and then to the neighborhood of the forest that they're imprinted on. And then finally down to the site level where they may look for that suitable spot for their nesting and brood rearing habitat. And we also need to think about arrangement of the habitat components they need, the arrangement of their cover, food, water, and space. With wildlife, it's all about energy and conserving the energy so that you have enough to reproduce and sustain your species. So you want to think about here, for example, a woodcock. Is the singing ground and roosting area it needs adjacent to the younger forest it needs for feeding? Is it also going to serve as nesting and brood rearing habitat close enough to it so it can find all the requirements it need in close arrangement? Here too, this slide shows considerations for different species and the type of succession they might need. If you want to benefit woodcock again, here you can see the range of young open areas to young forest. If you want to benefit sharp-tailed grouse, you're going to be aiming more towards the open grass brushland type habitat. For turkey, more for mature type forest and edge. And it's important to think about their home range, which is an area that an animal regularly uses and spends its time, encompasses all the resources that that animal needs to survive and reproduce. For an example, a deer needs a home range of 150 to 1,300 acres. So you need to think again about what's not only on your land, but in the neighborhood and what you might be able to provide on your land that's perhaps missing and a limitation to the deer population. For moose, even greater home range, 3,200 to 16,000 acres. And rough grouse, much smaller, 5 to 35 acres. So to keep that in mind when you're providing those components that the species you're interested in need. I like this slide because it shows an actual neighborhood north of Cromwell, and the yellow lines are property lines. This parcel down here with the woodcock on is about 40 acres, and it shows some examples of the species you might find in that neighborhood and how neighbors in the landscape can benefit them. A woodcock on average needs about 30 acres, so here one landowner alone in this riparian area could benefit them. Whereas the deer needing 1,300 acres, landowners together are going to need to think about what they can provide for them. And sharp-tailed grouse, to sustain a subpopulation, actually need an open complex of at least 15 square miles. So here, this landowner with 160 acres has a great opportunity to take advantage of his land and help this species. Also to consider species of concern in your neighborhood. These are species that are rare, are declining, or their habitats are threatened, and really encourage people to think about how they might help them. To find out what species are of special concern in your neighborhood, you can visit with your local DNR staff, whether it be wildlife or forestry or ecological water folks, and we can check our database and help you find out what you have present in your area. For example, you might have red-shouldered hawks, goshawks, or if you're in moose range, we'd really like to benefit our moose populations, or if we have remaining sharp-tailed grouse dancing grounds, we enjoy working with those folks and helping them maintain that habitat. Or if you'd like to benefit golden-winged warblers, um, we have our American Bird Conservancy foresters that consist with that. Also, when you're benefiting wildlife, to think about the different forest patterns and patch sizes and the different techniques. You can do something such as a shelter wood, which is going to leave trees. And if it's an instance where you want more canopy left, say you want to manage for amphibians or a species that needs more of a closed canopy left, this would be good. If you really want to open things up more, such as for sharp-tailed grouse, a biomass harvest might be more appropriate. Again, we want to mimic natural disturbance and leave reserve patches where appropriate depending on the goal, and fingers and strips in natural locations that may have been not disturbed where fire and wind shadows occurred. You can create a variety of habitat patches and shapes appropriate to the landscape and the goals. As I said, some species are going to benefit and some are not, depending on the timber harvest design. We have area-sensitive bird species and critters that need large forest patches. Some examples of those are sharp-shinned hawks, barred owls, broad-winged hawks, pileated woodpeckers, and goshawks. If you wish to benefit them, then we want to maintain large forest patches in our management. If you wish to benefit forest interior species, then large patches are also going to be desirable. For example, red-eyed vireos, wood thrushes, and ovenbirds are all considered forest interior species, whereas edge wildlife, just like it sounds, want more edge, more mixes of open and forest patches, fields and forest, for example. Birds and critters that benefit from that would be cowbirds, white-tailed deer, and wild turkeys. Usually cowbirds are not a species we want to benefit a whole lot. They are parasitic. Alrighty. Harvest and forest age. This slide just shows us, again, the different successional stages. Habitat really is manipulation of vegetation and deciding how best to manipulate it to meet your goals. Where along this successional stage do you want to have your habitat or habitats on your land? And these are our 4 native grouse species, and each one of them is a very good example of a different successional stage. Prairie chicken, using the very wide open prairies of our state and grasslands. Sharptail, using kind of what we call that in-between area, large landscapes that aren't quite forest and aren't quite prairie, but have scattered brush and trees within them. Rough grouse, which are deciduous species, and then our spruce grouse, which you're going to find in more mature forests with much more conifer. So where along here and what do you want to manage for? Some of the early successional wildlife that will benefit from harvest include, again, sharp-tailed grouse, woodcock, moose due to the browse, snowshoe hare, cottontail rabbits, white-tailed deer, rough grouse like young aspen forest especially, golden-winged warblers, eastern towhees. Even within these, it's important to note that, for example, white-tailed deer don't need entirely young forest. They do benefit from it, but they do need um, some older forest and conifer patches for thermal cover. And same with moose. Moose like the browse of young habitats. However, they do need thermal cover in the summer to stay cool. So conifer patches are going to be good for them too. And then to consider browse. When we're regenerating our forest, things such as red osier dogwood could really be rejuvenated. Red osier dogwood is pretty much candy to deer. And so to think about browse for deer, whether it be for moose, but also that browse for our grouse, rough grouse and sharptail eat a lot of catkins and buds from aspen and birch and other woody vegetation. And then late successional wildlife species. If you wish to benefit things such as least flycatcher, black-throated blue warblers, ovenbirds, black bears, and gray squirrels, these are critters that are going to benefit from an older aging forest. But again, even within these, they don't need entirely, totally landscapes of mature forest. For example, a black bear is still going to benefit from wildlife openings that have berries in them and other mass-producing shrubs and trees. And then to consider forest structure. Um, in our forests and all habitat, structure is very important. Many wildlife are not specifically tuned in to just a certain plant or tree, but more seeking for that structure. Um, Everything from the soil and the forest floor up to the understory, to the midstory, to the canopy, to the super canopy, all those layers are important and provide different microhabitats for wildlife, different places for them to find food and cover. And the more structure and greater variety you have of these, the more niches and then the more species you'll have present. The one type of habitat that perhaps is you don't want quite as much structure in would be a savanna. And savannas really are prairies with just scattered trees within them. They tend to be more park-like with less structure. But most of our typical forests here in Minnesota, we want all these layers. And then to remember to retain sufficient dead and live standing trees and woody debris during harvest. As I said, what you leave behind is just as important as what you take out of the forest when you're harvesting. Whether it's brush clumps, non-merchantable stems, the stumps, the coarse woody debris, the fine woody debris, and the live and dead standing trees. All of this provides additional food and cover. For example, the hard and soft snags for perches, cavities, for nest dens, and for bark foraging critters such as woodpeckers, fisher, martin, the owls, wood ducks. Minnesota has 40 birds, 29 mammals, and several reptile amphibian species that need these trees and snags. The trees that are left, as I said, provide perches and cavities, bark foraging sites, and can leave representative forest patches for their genetic material. We found that older, large diameter trees, at least 15 to 20 inches, can provide these dens, especially aspens and oak. The remaining woody debris and small brush piles are food and cover for vertebrates, small mammals, nurse logs like this one here for cedar, places for fungi to grow, homes for reptiles. Folks are encouraged to leave all the standing dead trees they can, And to leave live trees in clumps is preferable, at least 5% of the site, more than a quarter of an acre, or 6 to 12 scattered trees per acre of the preferred species in a ranges of sizes and conditions that really represent what was there at the site. The retained down logs and stumps in at least a third of the slash should be scattered across the site. Just here's some more examples of leaving some of that structure behind, such as tip-ups that are thrown over in the wind that could perhaps serve as a bear den later, and the down logs that serve as drumming logs. Some of the best trees to leave as leave trees are white pine, oak, elms, ashes, sugar maple, yellow birch, basswood, and aspen. Here you can see a fisher using a downed log as a den, and these are good examples here in these photos of leaving clumps in your reserve patches versus scattered trees. Currently, we do have some research underway with Fisher and Martin, and what we've been finding when it comes to these leave trees is that Fisher, 71% of the time we're using live trees, and a quarter of the time snags or dead trees. And the average was diameter at breast height overall was 20.5 inches, and for the aspen trees, 20.4 inches. So that kind of gives you an idea of how big a tree you need to leave. And then for marten, we were finding that the average diameter at breast height was about 18.5 inches. And then legacy trees. These are old individual trees that have survived past stand replacing disturbances. They're usually much older and larger, generally really long-lived species such as this white pine that this bald eagle nest is in, this very large, maybe up to even 300-year-old red pine from the Lost 40 here in Minnesota, or these old oaks. They can provide a biological legacy. The genetics in them is very important. They've lived this long. There's probably some genes in there you'd like to see passed along. And then also riparian areas. These wetland areas and riparian areas, which are the transition between land and water, such as along rivers and lake shores and wetlands, are very important to adding habitat diversity. All types of wetlands and riparian areas, whether they're temporary or deep water ones, have important functions. For example, these temporary wetlands or vernal ponds that we have in our forests are the first to warm up in the spring and provide invertebrates for waterfowl and breeding habitat for amphibians such as frogs and salamanders. We want to make sure we buffer our wetlands and avoid draining or filling or rutting in them, and to keep disturbance of them to a minimum so we don't cause soil compaction or erosion. This slide here is one of my favorites, showing the ribbon of life, the diversities of habitats that can occur in these areas. If you are a landowner of lakeshore or along rivers or wetlands, it's good to just let that woody debris fall into the water and not to clean up the whole shore. Leaving that woody debris provides structure and home for fish, loafing areas for turtles and waterfowl. Just let it be a little messy. Wildlife like it messy. All right, Eli, I've been talking for quite a while. Should I take a break and see if there's any questions? Okay, I'm going to continue on then. Then also small wildlife openings were appropriate in many of our forests that have evolved under disturbances. Small openings typically often occur, and they can be very helpful for wildlife. Eli, do I hear you? All right, just wondering if there's a question.
Jodie, did you hear the question?
Yes. No, I didn't hear anything. All right, go ahead. If there's a question, go ahead.
Okay. Jodie, sorry about the confusion here. How do you address the understanding that succession doesn't go in a straight line, that there are multiple types of disturbance, and that different plant communities sometimes have different successional pathways?
Okay, sorry, hearing a bunch of echo or something there. How to address that? Yes, every plant community is going to be different as to what they're evolved under and are adapted to. So it's just, you just need to consider that each site's going to be different, and depending on the goals, how to work within that. I'm not sure if that's getting at exactly what they want.
All right. Yeah, that's the only question I see right now, Jodie. So why don't you
Okay.
proceed? And if there's a follow-up, maybe that person can submit it again.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. I will continue on. Okay, so anyways, when it comes to wildlife openings, if it is appropriate in your particular habitat, what is usually encouraged is, 5 to 10 acres per 100 acres of forest, by cutting trees and brush or mowing them to clear about either 1/2 to 5 acre openings with irregular edges is going to be best and most natural. And what happens is this allows sunlight down to the ground to stimulate those native shrubs, grasses, and forbs to stimulate new growth and provide mast and cover and insects for wildlife. And I like to make sure to distinguish between food plots and wildlife openings. Wildlife openings are much more beneficial, and what they are is just taking advantage of the native plants. You're not converting the plant community, you're just setting back succession to rejuvenate the existing vegetation that's there. Whereas in a food plot, to me, it's sort of just like a miniature agricultural field, and you are converting the native habitat. Um, you can see the structure here is much less. The more natural wildlife opening is going to have greater structure, benefit a much wider variety of wildlife versus a food plot. And, nowadays, much of the seed that we put in the ground is treated with neonics, which is not going to be good for our native bees or birds, or other wildlife. It's very persistent in the environment. So I guess I just highly encourage taking advantage of wildlife openings, much less work and much more beneficial for wildlife. And when it comes to wildlife openings, several small ones are generally better than one large one, unless, of course, you're in the moose range, then larger ones are better for moose. We don't want to create openings where many already exist. We need, again, to consider your neighborhood. If there's a lot of openings already that have been punched into the forest and converted it, perhaps you don't need any wildlife openings at all and just utilize what's already there. It's important to consider those special critters of need, such as goshawks, red-shouldered hawks, or deer yards, where we don't want to create openings or set back succession, but we want mature, contiguous patches of forest. And if you do create wildlife openings or maintain them, light maintenance, such as mowing or hand cutting or burning outside the primary nesting season, is really what's preferred. And then to consider conifer retention and regeneration. In general, we, prior to pre-settlement and the initial harvest of our forest, we had a lot more conifer on the landscape. And so we're working to get some of that conifer back and to increase the diversity in our forests again. Conifer mixed in is very valuable for wildlife. So when harvesting, to consider protecting conifer regeneration, especially in clumps. And when you're leaving trees, to consider some of those super canopy white pine and red pine or pockets of mature conifers. Cedar is very valuable, so always retain cedar when you can. And for winter cover for deer or for thermal refuges in the summer for moose, the conifer is very helpful. And then to consider mast for the wildlife you want to benefit. Native trees and shrubs that produce hard and soft mast, and that's nuts, seeds, buds, catkins, and fruits, are especially attractive to many wildlife, from everything from deer, bear, turkeys to our forest songbirds. And then invasives, those nasties that we have to watch out for. They've become a very huge problem here in our forest, and they negatively impact the forest health, reducing the biodiversity in a forest because they outcompete other plants. The first step, of course, is prevention, to learn to identify those invasives that are taking over your neighborhood, or maybe you're starting to get introduced, to know what the common ones are and what they look like. That way, when you find them, you immediately can start controlling them. But very importantly, prevention. We want to ensure that all of our equipment, whether it's timber harvest equipment or your own mower or your ATV that you're bringing to your land, arrives clean and then leaves clean. So we're not inadvertently bringing, say, buckthorn seeds or garlic mustard or other kind of species to our land. There's also common tansy, hawkweed. A lot of these little seeds can accidentally hitchhike even on our own boots or our four-wheelers, our mowers, or our tractors, or on logging equipment. So to come clean to your land and to leave clean when you leave your land. And finally, I guess, this covers a lot of ground. It's a pretty general talk about all the things to consider when you want to benefit wildlife with a timber harvest, but to appreciate and conserve what you have on your land. To become aware of any special plant communities or wildlife you have, to understand them and to appreciate and conserve them, that is to use them wisely, and the habitats and wildlife that occur there, and especially those that are native. Going native is always best, and that not every parcel of land could or should provide everything. Each of our parcels of land is unique in its own way and is not necessarily meant to have everything from a pond to forest to a prairie to brushlands on it. And so just to appreciate for what it is and what it lends itself best for in management. And so I guess that's it. This is my contact information. And just to remind folks that nature is not a place to visit, it is home. And we as people are part of nature, and our homes, our private lands, are part of nature and its processes, and it's an important stewardship role that we have to take care of them. Okay, any questions?
Thanks, Jodie. I'm hoping you can hear me now. I think think you can.
Yep.
Thanks for a good presentation. Wonder if we have any questions here locally to pass along to Jodie. I don't see any others online right now, but folks can, again, use that Q&A to enter questions down on the lower right part of your screen, and I'll pass those along to Jodie. Any questions here in the room? Yeah.
Seems like fire is used a lot over in Wisconsin as well as timber harvest for managing land. Is there any entities in the state of Minnesota that, other than DNR, that use fire for wildlife management?
Jodie, were you able to hear that question?
Yeah, that sounds like Greg. Yeah. Other entities that use fire besides DNR, I know the Nature Conservancy does. And I know some of the tribes do. Of course, we encourage private landowners to use it as a habitat management tool whenever possible. That help?
Successional forest to maintain it?
Jodie, I think I got my mic on a little too late. Have you studied the effect of fire on late successional forest to maintain it? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
That's not something I have done myself. No, I'm trying to think of if any of our researchers have done that. Not that I'm aware of within DNR, no. I would bet you other people have, though. There's resources you could check, like with the Fire Consortium, to see what's been done in that.
Thanks, Jodie. We have a couple more questions here coming in online. I'll fire two at you at the same time because they're related. What are the ideal opening sizes for moose in the moose range? I heard at a meeting last week Nate Ide with the Lake County Land Department and some others talking about some of the moose and forest management work that has been, they said, quite successful up there in terms of creating more browse for moose. But I wonder if you have any thoughts on ideal opening sizes. So that's one that came in. I elaborated a bit online.
Okay.
But then, what do you tell a private landowner with only 40 acres who wants to manage for moose? They probably don't have enough land to create a big enough opening. That's all for now.
Okay. Yeah, I guess opening size, right? If it is appropriate in that particular plant committee and meeting goals for that species, it's just going to depend on the species you want to benefit. And I guess for the ideal size for moose, I would want to defer to asking some of our moose managers or moose researchers what they think. I don't know if there is an ideal size. They can put your finger on that exactly, but I know it's, if you want to manage for moose versus deer, bigger is better. If they'd like me to ask our moose managers, I could find that out and get back to them. And then what to tell a landowner, I guess, if they want to have a large, if they're in the moose range and they want to benefit moose and they're willing to have a large opening on their land, wonderful. Or if they want to work with their neighbors to have their projects complement each other to get enough openings and browse, but also thermal cover and healthy wetlands for moose. It really could be a neighborhood effort for moose because they have large home ranges. That's probably what you would need. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great. One more comment and then another question. Someone from up on the North Shore wrote that the Superior National Forest is also using prescribed fire for wildlife habitat as well. And then a question, is DNR doing anything to actively discourage the use of genetically modified seed on food plots?
I know within our own state lands and our wildlife management areas, we have reviewed our processes and are striving to use seed on our own food plots that is not neonic treated. And we don't have a whole lot of food plots except for perhaps in the elk range of northwest Minnesota, where they do food plots to try to keep the elk on the state lands, and so they're not depredating on the private lands, and in a few areas of our farmland. But in general, we've kind of been trying to go away from that. As far as private food plots, just education and outreach, informing people, and there's still a whole lot we don't know about the chemicals we're using, other than we know that we're learning more and more not good. So we're trying to encourage people to go light, if not eliminate, pesticides, herbicides, treatments on seeds. As we learn more and do more research, we can continue sharing that information. So, just information, education at this point of what we are aware of, trying to pass that along to folks.
Great, thanks, Jody. Interesting question from up in Ely. Fuels reduction practice commonly removes all balsam fir. How does that relate to loss of thermal cover and vertical stratification for wildlife?
Yeah, I guess depending on the species you want to benefit, you wouldn't want to lose all that structure and that cover. I guess, for example, just reading about spruce grouse again the other day and listening to something that our grouse project leader told us, that they're in their spruce grouse research, they're finding they like to use forest with a lot of structure to it, not a real clean understory. So and in that particular example for spruce grouse, then we're going to want to have the young in different layers of whether it's spruce or fir or other conifers under there.
Great. And we have another one here if I can get to it. Just a comment. Good balsam fir question. But Jody, I wanted to ask you something to follow up on some of the slides you presented in the middle of your talk. So you listed a number of species and you said, these species need edge conditions, and those other species need interior forest conditions. What do you tell a landowner who just says, I don't know the difference between a cowbird and an ovenbird, but I just want to help out with whatever species have the greatest need, and I want to help out. So, but I don't know what to do. Who should I call, or how can I make the biggest benefit for wildlife on my land? How would you answer that question?
Yep, that's a good question because I do get that a lot. In my position, I'm sort of a forest wildlife generalist, and so my job is as these landowners contact me to get them started down the right path, and many of them, like you just said, come to me with that question. I just purchased 80 acres, in such and such county, and I just want to do the best thing I can on it for wildlife and for my family and hunting and um, so that's where I try to help them embrace, what habitats and wildlife they currently have there and help them understand what species of concern that they could really help with. There's species out there that are doing just fine, and to help them understand which ones are not doing as fine, and that they might be able to do something on their land or with their neighbors that could really affect what those barriers are that are limiting that species. Um, so just inform them. You can't ever make them do anything, but you can give them the best information. Share with them the programs. I share with them their local contacts for the NRCS and SWCD offices. I share with them their local private forest manager lead from our DNR forestry folks. I just help them wade through the programs, the contacts, and the uniqueness of their land and how they can help make a difference.
All right, a couple of other things. One is I want to make sure I don't forget this. There's I mentioned before, these webinars are done with both SFEC and Extension, and there's an Extension Master Woodland Owner Program cohort starting up that's going to focus on content very much like we heard today, focused on forest management to improve wildlife habitat. That's going to be based up on the Iron Range, the Laurentian, we're calling it the Laurentian cohort, and it starts up, I think, in August. I'll put a link in the chat pod, and we'll follow up with that information by email later. But I did want to be sure to mention that. Again, it's a several month long landowner focused training offered by the Extension Forestry team here at the U that is happening up on the Iron Range starting later this summer. There was something else that I was just going to say. Oh, Jodie, you mentioned that you come out and do site visits with landowners. How many wildlife specialists are there? Is there generally a long wait for that? How many of those do you typically do? How does that work?
Okay, unfortunately, I don't do many, and I can't do a whole lot. I work statewide on our forest habitat team, and my job is to promote and support forest and brushland habitats on our private land. And since there's just one of me on the forest habitat team, I'm instructed primarily to do that by working with partners through outreach, workshops, presentations, train the trainer type things, articles, webinars like this. On occasion, I can meet with landowners, but I can't meet with every one of them that contacts me. It's just not possible. So I try to prioritize. And, one of the things that I'm instructed to help primarily with is benefiting sharp-tailed grouse and brushland wildlife on our private lands. So if there are folks that I am able to take the time to go visit and help them in person and see their land, which I love doing, it's usually for sharp-tail, and it's usually in east central Minnesota, such as right now I'm trying to help in Pine and Kanabec counties, where their populations have greatly declined, and we're trying to inform landowners and help them do what they can. Within DNR, I am underneath, umbrellaed under our wildlife habitat program, and we currently just have 2 private land specialists, myself on the forest team, and then John Miley, who serves on the wetland habitat team. The 3rd team under this program is the prairie farmland team, and that private land specialist position is currently vacant. Not sure if we'll get that filled anytime soon with the tight budget or not. But so just 2 of us. John, like myself, works statewide. And also he primarily serves in a supportive coordination type role, working with partners on large projects. And we try to have as much impact as we can with one person. And but we do love the site visits. They are the most fun. And I know it is what landowners crave and really need.
Thanks, Jody. Question here from Cloquet.
The DNR recently hired about 17 new foresters for private land management. Is that correct, Jody? And would they be a good resource for, if you can't make a site visit, that they could contact these one of the 17 private forest land managers?
And Jody, before you answer that, I'm going to jump in. I just shared a link to the DNR Forestry Cost Share Program. I know that does include funding for wildlife habitat improvement. So while you're talking about their ability to do those site visits and so on, I wonder if you have any thoughts on the status of cost sharing that consulting foresters or others might want to be able to pass along.
Okay, so yeah, sort of two things there. Yes, I highly recommend the DNR Forestry PFM folks around the state. Was just tickled pink when they were able to get funding a year ago to amp up the number of people that they have. It was badly needed. And as I said earlier, when landowners contact me, that's one of the first things I do is tell them about the Forest Stewardship Program and who their local PFM person is. Usually copy them on the email, give them their phone number. Yes, we use that a lot. And then as far as cost share, yeah, really glad that they have cost share again through PFM. That's very helpful, especially for landowners that maybe aren't interested in signing up through NRCS programs such as EQIP or CSP. And it's really nice that cost share also, it's sort of your traditional forestry type projects, but also, habitat projects in general, and, also for brushlands, and it could be prairie restoration. So it kind of covers a breadth and can be real holistic in assisting landowners.
Jody, I'm going to throw two questions at you again here. First, I think a quick one. Somebody asked where to get seed that has not been treated with neonicotinoid pesticides. So where to get that? You've talked about the benefit of it.
Yeah.
And then a second question from up on the North Shore regarding maintaining older forests with wildfire. The Superior has been thinning and then underburning mature red pine stands to prolong the rotation and create multi-aged structure. I guess, again, a comment, not a question, but you could elaborate on that if you want. And then where to get that seed that has not been treated.
Yep. Okay, I would have to check on the seed question with some of our farmland folks in the other parts of the state where we do have food plots on the state lands. So I would need to check and get back to you. I know they are finding it. So there are sources. And then I guess as far as the comment, I don't really have anything additional to add to that. Just that's wonderful.
All right. One more. Yeah, go ahead.
You can probably guess who this is again, Jody, but I would, as I also wear a county egg inspector hat, I would caution on going through mail order seed because you're not exactly sure of what you're getting. In a couple of western counties, Palmer Amaranth got into the county because of purchase of seed through mail order down out of Texas, which brought in this highly invasive weed, which has caused the legislature this year just to go crazy. So make sure your seed source is reputable and actually gets a stamp of approval from the Department of Ag.
Yes, very good points.
All right, I'm not seeing any other questions at this point, so I think I'll draw us to a close. Jody, thank you for a terrific presentation. Again, I want to remind folks, we will include the link to that Laurentian Master Woodland Owner Program that starts up in August in the follow-up email. And we'll also include a little bit more information that came out during the Q&A and so on today. I want to thank Jody for a terrific talk. Reminder that next month we will hear from Mark Nelson. Mark is with the Forest Inventory and Analysis Program. His talk has a title fairly similar to this one, but it'll be a pretty different talk. It's going to be focused on what we can learn from this large-scale forest inventory and analysis program about trends and conditions in our forest relevant to wildlife habitat considerations. And Mark's talk is actually kind of the first part of what we see as a fairly major event that's going to happen in Grand Rapids in October 10th and 11th, focused on exploring opportunities through forest management to improve wildlife habitat. So Mark will be giving one of the lead-off talks at that event, and his talk next month will kind of set that up and go into a bit more detail. So if you're interested in this wildlife and forest management topic, I'd encourage you to come on back next month. You can find information about that event on our website. Again, this is Eli here in Cloquet. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and we will hopefully see you again next month.